evidence that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not somebody who's going to kind of be persuaded through private communications from the U.S. president. I mean, obviously, this is an impressive operation. The question is the tactical setback to Hezbollah worth the escalation risk, worth the reputational risk, worth the establishment of a new norm that suggests that this is kind of an acceptable use of force? And on all those things, I think the jury is very much still out.
Ben Rhodes, President Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor, in the White House rather. Jeremy Bowen, our international editor, is listening to that. An audacious synchronised attack against a group prescribed by the UK government and others as terrorists. What is the latest?
Well, the latest is, as Ben Rhodes is telling you, that Israel has scored a significant tactical triumph, really, in this extraordinary operation, a spectacular coup, that sort of thing you read about in a thriller. And undoubtedly, it's a humiliation for Hezbollah. It's bad for their morale. It increases their insecurity. But there is a serious strategic downside, potentially, for the Israelis, because while this humiliates the Lebanese militia, it doesn't deter them, and it doesn't get closer to Israel's strategic aim of stopping the fire going into their country and allowing those Israelis, 60,000 plus, who have been in their homes for getting on for a year, back to them.
I mean, again, we should, I suppose, keep caveating it is Israel to the point that it's not actually been admitted, but it's been said by many it could only be at this point. In terms of a response from Iran, have we heard anything on that?
No, not as yet. There have been reports suggesting that the ambassador isn't as badly hurt. The ambassador to Lebanon, who was injured in this attack, that he wasn't as badly hurt as people thought. I think that undoubtedly Hezbollah and their allies in in Iran will be sort of licking their wounds at the moment. But I think that once again the region has been pushed right to the brink of an all-out war. Sooner or later they will fall over the cliff if this continues. And it's hard to see, apart from the fact that it looks as if, according to reports in a reputable Middle East newsletter, which is called Al Monitor, the plan originally was to use these booby trap pages as the first blow in a big escalation, an offensive, an invasion perhaps of southern Lebanon. But the reports were that Hezbollah was getting suspicious, so Israel was forced to attack to trigger this attack prematurely. So it used an important and audacious weapon, which is really very effective in their terms. But they haven't used it. This is the case of the way that they've run it, is that Hezbollah were out devastating attacks while Hezbollah were weakling. And so when they used this, they showed that they got inside their communications, they showed they could window. It doesn't, as I said, take the region one huge back from an all-out war.
Is there any group that can stop Hezbollah from this fire?
I think it's what I was telling you earlier on. Everything is going in terms of de-escalation of the conflict rising. While that war is going on, nothing, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in the Red Sea, whether it's in Iraq, nothing is going to de-escalate. The American envoy, Amos Hochstein, has been working assiduously, talking to the Lebanese representatives, whatever the people of Israel, and also talking to Israelis about the plans and plans of working to de-escalate this diplomatically. And he told Americans what they were doing in moments before. So it's not going to have a result.
23 minutes past 8. Big changes are supposedly coming to teenager accounts on
你知唔知 Upright 去咗邊度
social media network.
？Upright 去咗邊間學校啊？
Facebook, WhatsApp, and many other services.
你有冇其他同學走咗啊？除咗 Upright 之外
to sign up, but after the privacy changes have just been announced, all
Just him.
designated accounts will be turned into teen accounts
Peace spell.
automatically, and they'll be private.
My little friend,
Those accounts can only be messaged and tagged by
你有冇新 friend 啊？咁而家
most restrictive.
Do you have new friends?
On social media.
Huh?
The other changes include the fact that offensive
What?
words and phrases will be automatically
Hello.
filtered out of both comments,
Pretty much.
messages, and teenagers will get notifications telling them to leave the app after 60 minutes each day. So simply sleep mode automatically turned on from 10 a.m. and 7 a.m. The same changes are now in force across the US, Canada, and Australia. What impact will they have on Mark Bunting, who is the online safety director at Ofcom, and joins us now. Mark, good morning. Pleasure. How will this change the lives of teenagers?
Well, these announcements are very much in line with proposals made earlier this year in our draft of online safety guidelines. We know that parents and children are concerned, particularly about younger users who are approached by strangers online. We made a number of proposals to ensure that these services make it harder for children to access by people they don't know. So it's good to see this step in the right direction from Meta. We've been working closely with industry since the legislation passed to make sure firms understand the new rules, and we're all seeing some companies respond to regulation in real time. But actually, it's important to be clear, it's only a start, and we will be monitoring closely to make sure the services are doing everything they should.
And what's to stop kids just lying about their age?
Okay.
Well, it's one of the issues that we want to see more action on. We do know that children often give false dates of birth, and services historically haven't done enough to check the age of their users. In some cases, they've done very little. And of course, these protections will only apply to teens that Instagram know are teens. And we're going to be looking to services to make more changes to make sure that they know which of their users are under 18.
I know you're a regulator rather than a politician, but some people listening to you might say, if we're worried about teenagers who are impressionable with elastic and plastic minds being exposed to harmful stuff, why don't we just ban it? You know, there is this growing movement across in America, a lot of it following the work of Jonathan Haidt, the psychologist who's written that book, The Anxious Generation. If you look at what's coming out of Australia, where this week they've said actually smartphone access is going to be very heavily restricted for young people. If we're worried about young people's safety, why don't we just go the whole hog and ban it?
Well, I think there is this global debate developing, as you say, about child use of social media and other services. We've got a very particular role, which is to make sure that services that are available to younger users are safe for younger users. We want children to be able to benefit from the best that the internet has to offer. And as you say, if government and parliament wish to make further changes in this area,
it's your job to enforce those regulations rather than to come up with legislation. I do get that. Yeah, have a listen to this if you would, Mark. This is online safety campaigner Ian Russell, who I know you all know well. Our listeners will know him well. His daughter Molly killed herself when she was 14 after being exposed to very depressing content on social media, particularly on Instagram. And this is Ian Russell's assessment of this week's announcement.
It's always really hard to judge the level of effectiveness that the changes social media companies introduce might have. For example, in 2019, when we first spoke publicly about Molly, Instagram said that they would no longer allow graphic self-harm content on the platform. And yet, November of last year, when the Molly Rose Foundation did some research, we found content very similar to the content that Molly had been looking at in the 6 months before she died. Still there and still pretty easy to find. That wasn't effective. So at the point of announcement, and there's lots of detail to dig into and get to understand, it's hard to be conclusive. There are measures in this announcement that seem to be a step forward, but there are also questions raised, and it's only when we've got answers to those questions and we see how effective this is in practice that we'll really know.
But that was Ian Russell. Father of Molly Russell, talking to our sister programme, The World at One, yesterday. And I think the central point that he makes, Mark, is we've often heard the social media platforms and
你唔好習慣唔安全帶，好危險㗎
claims
喎。
on what they would change.
你見嗰啲人飛出嚟㗎架車咁樣。
Sod all has changed. What do you say to that argument?
So I really agree with Ian's analysis there. This will be the first time that big social media services now have independent, robust regulatory scrutiny applied to the changes that they're making. We think that point about assessing the effectiveness of these changes is absolutely key. We published a paper earlier this year
about how services could go about evaluating the impact of the changes that they make. It's an area that we'll really want to look closely to industry to take a leading position on.
All right, Mark Bunting, Online Safety Director for Ofcom. Thank you very much indeed.
It is 28 minutes past 8. He's just got back in. Let's get the latest on sport. Hello, Becky. Very much so.
Really late.
I didn't run it, thankfully, but joined us. But she's sat there the whole time, just finding out what's happening.
I am. Talking about the Champions League first. They returned last night with a 3-1 win for Liverpool over AC Milan and for Aston Villa, who beat Young Boys 3-0 in their first win in Europe's top club competition for over 40 years. Tonight, Manchester City host Inter Milan. Celtic faced Slovan Bratislava. Last night, Manchester United had a 7-0 win over the League side Barnsley in the third round of the English League Cup, and there was a 16-15 penalty shootout win for Championship side Preston North End over Fulham. All results as usual on the BBC Sport website. Now, Glasgow has confirmed it will host the 2026 Commonwealth Games after a deal was backed by the Scottish Government. The Australian state of Victoria withdrew as the original host due to rising costs. Full funding of sports events like the Commonwealth Games, and particularly the scale of fossil fuel sponsorship in sport, is the subject of a report by the New Weather Institute, which is out today. The report states that major oil and gas companies are spending at least $5.6 billion on the sponsorship of global sport, with the United Nations General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, expected to call for an end to alliances with the oil and gas sector in the UN's Summit of the Future this month. I've been speaking to the Paris 2024 Olympic rowing champion, Imogen Grant, who is also a doctor, about fossil fuel sponsorship.
The climate crisis is growing, and I think this report is going to highlight that sport at the moment is being used to improve the perception of these dirty companies that are doing terrible things to our environment, directly impacting the sports that they're then sponsoring.
You used the word dirty when you were talking about the companies that are putting money in, but sport has immense social capital, positive health impacts that makes it attractive to companies that do want to be seen in a positive light. And sport needs sponsors, doesn't it? That's not going to change anytime soon.
No, it isn't going to change, and at the moment a lot of that is coming from massive national state-owned fossil fuel sponsors, but it's not a deal that sport can accept for much longer. Those are the exact same companies that are causing the climate crisis at the moment and are going to make pitches flooded. They're going to make it too hot to run races.
What's the alternative? Do you think other companies can bring in the same sort of money to sport?
I absolutely think they can. The Paris Olympic Games was an absolute triumph this summer, and that was a completely fossil fuel free game. They've shown it's possible, and I think with the building momentum among athletes, among players, and also with the general public, they don't want to see dirty sports. They want to see us playing clean, and we can't really hold ourselves to those values unless our sponsors reflect it as well.
The timing of this report is interesting after such a big summer of sport, but sport's viability is challenged by flooding, storms, the warmest summer on record across the planet, according to the Copernicus Climate Change Service. Are you concerned certain sports or events won't have a long-term future?
I'm rowing out of one of my local rowing clubs at the moment, and at the start of the season meeting, it was literally discussed up front that the likelihood of flooding is so high and the amount of rowing is going to be small, so get on the water as soon as you can because you might not be able to later. It's grassroots sports that are affected the most, disproportionately so from the high performance sports, and it really is an existential threat being able to do grassroots and elite sports across the world.
And what can athletes do? Apart from use your voice, use your platforms, what more can you do?
Whether it's sustainability or whether it's a different cause, athletes are the perfect role models to try and push these forward, and I think for us, we need to say no to fossil fuels, we need to say no to dirty sponsorship.
There's also the issue of travel. It's one of the trickier issues of events. There are athletes, there are fans, the media, one-off souvenirs being made. An Olympics that you've just been at and won a gold medal at isn't an Olympics without some of those aspects, is it?
That is true, but when you look at the fact 80% of global carbon emissions are caused by the fossil fuel companies, and just like in sport, when you work together to achieve something as a team, you achieve something that's great to gather some of those parts. And I think the Paris Olympics inspired not only sports people, but also companies showing that you can run it without fossil fuels. And so I think we can move towards a fossil fuel-free world.
Imogen Grant, Paris Olympic rowing champion and doctor. And tomorrow I'll be talking to a couple of Bens, Olympic sailing champion Ben Ainsley, and one for you, and cricketer Ben Duckett, ahead of England's one-day international series against Australia.
Fantastic. He's a wonderful player. Carthy, thank you very much indeed. Coming up in just about 28 minutes' time, it'll be more or less, and here's Tim Harford to tell us more. We're told that 9,500 millionaires will leave the country this year because of Labour's tax policies, which raises the question, how would anyone go about figuring that out? Our listeners told us we missed the point with last week's fact check about the benefits paid to asylum seekers. Well, perhaps we'll take aim again this time. We don't generally endorse gambling, but if it's two policy wonks making a bet about who's right, we're here all day for that. And what does a string quartet teach us about the woes of the National Health Service? That's more or less with me, Tim Harford, on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds in half an hour.
We'll do it all with that, actually. 26 minutes to 9, a look at the weather. This morning, any areas of mist and fog and low cloud in southern and central parts will tend to break up, and I have to be able to give you that reassurance. It will then be a dry, sunny and warm day.
That is reassuring. You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Emma Barnett and Amol Raj. It's 26 minutes to 9. Here's a summary of the news from James.
The Lebanese militia group Hezbollah says its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, will make an unscheduled address tomorrow after attempts were targeted in simultaneous attacks. At least 9 people were killed and thousands wounded when their bridges exploded yesterday. The United Nations, the US and the UK have called for restraint. Ben Rhodes, who served as President Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor, told us only Israel could have carried out the attack. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was ignoring the Biden administration, which has been urging Israel to avoid escalation. Israel is yet to comment. More than 120 international charities have called on the government not to reduce overseas aid in the budget next month. Foreign aid currently amounts to less than 0.6% of the UK's expenditure. At the general election, Labour promised to return it to 0.7% when circumstances allow. Official figures for the last month show the annual rate of inflation has remained unchanged at 2.2%. The Office for National Statistics says higher airfares have been offset by the lower cost of fuel, restaurants and hotels. The American maker of food storage containers Tupperware and some of its subsidiaries have filed for bankruptcy. The company has been struggling with falling sales because of cheaper competition.
Jane, thank you so much. It's 25 minutes to 9. All this week we've been hearing stories brought to us by Today programme listeners. That's you. This morning our listeners are Dr. Lisa Wright and Dr. Mark Walton, both clinical psychologists who work on Merseyside in the only NHS unit of its kind, where they're trying to cut criminal offending rates using therapy. It's not an alternative to prison. The NHS Forensic Psychology Centre in Liverpool works with people who have served custodial sentences who might be at risk of re-offending. But uniquely, the unit also works with families in the community to stop new parents who might be at risk of serious offending from committing crimes. Our Home and Legal Affairs correspondent Dominic Cassiani visited the NHS Forensic Psychology Centre, and this is the first time that they've allowed journalists in to see the work they do.
I'm outside Liverpool Crown Court. Few courts in the country dish out more justice than this rather intimidating piece of brutalist architecture, just a seagull swoop from the Mersey. Today there are 17 courts running at full pelt. We've got 3 defendants of the possession of weapons, a few for assaults, threats to kill, 2 alleged robbers, 2 suspected arsonists, and 6 people facing a variety of sexual offences. This is the tide of violence and human misery that's not unique to Merseyside.
This court and courts around the northwest, really a complete wide range of offences, to be honest.
Isabella Denwhite is 3 years into her career here as a barrister.
Coming to court and see a really horrible effects, but then when you speak to a defendant and you often learn of the really tragic upbringing they've had, often things could be tactful to do with their life that may help stop them from committing those offences.
Listening to the grim tales of criminals in courts is my bread and butter, but I'm not here for that. I'm in Liverpool to meet 2 Today listeners who want to show us their work in crime prevention. Hi, it's Dominic from BBC.
I'm Dr. Lisa Wright. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and the service lead for Mersey Forensic Psychology Service, which is part of Merseycare NHS Foundation Trust.
I'm Dr. Mark Walton, also a consultant clinical psychologist, and I'm the clinical lead for Mental Treatment Plans across Merseyside and Cheshire.
Psychological therapy, usually one-to-one, usually weekly sessions.
For 30 years, this clinic has worked with ex-offenders in the community. Their clients include people convicted of violence and last 6 years, they've expanded to include people who haven't yet offended. It's the only NHS prevention service of its kind.
The overall aim for all our clients is to prevent them the first time offending.
Working with provincially armed sexual offenders is difficult, but Ryan says a team looks at trauma suffered in childhood as a damage an adult's thinking.
If you imagine a child growing up in a home or in a care home where they don't feel safe, imagine them being beaten up regularly by parents. A common theme that we hear is that as the child gets older and they grow bigger, there comes a day where they fight back. So in that moment, they've learned that the way I can feel safe is by attacking other people. And in their mind, it becomes a thing of two options where they feel I'm either vulnerable, weak, hurt, or I'm strong, dominant, safe. They take that forward into adult life, into adult interactions. So therapy then is about helping them to realise that's a middle ground, that is at one extreme or the other, they can learn how to feel safe without hurting other people.
For listening. Thank you for your understanding, Smile. Thank you for taking the time and to listen for a while. But
In the clinic's office, there are cards from the men looking for their count, and there's a word from a client who's offended with heritage drugs.
I now feel like a toddler who's first learning the ABCs. You have given me the tools to lift myself up from my knees.
The hardest part of their work is reaching potential sex offenders.
So we have posters, we have leaflets and GP surgeries.
How many people are coming to you via that?
The numbers are lower than we expected. We've only had about 20 people since we launched in 2019.
Clearly some people are scared. But what would you say to make the big difference? So Harry, just going to take your contribution to this. How did you first come into this?
I wanted to come here when I first heard about the reduce my risk of being offended to live a normal life. I knew I was ready to commit to do to it, of course, but I was quite scared to see things I'd never said before about the child.
Harry was his real name voluntarily came in after serving a sentence for sexual abuse. He actually had been abused since completing therapy 8 years ago. He's not offended.
Now I've got a job, I'm not waking up overnight, sleep properly, got no intrusive thoughts about the children. I understand that it's really, really bad offence and it should never have happened.
So just locking somebody up isn't going to change what's made them offend. So if they're going to be re-released at some point, then we need to know that they are going to be safer when they're released.
A lot of people take the view that prison works. You lock people up, they can't commit a crime.
But that approach is waiting until people have committed a crime and created a victim and caused damage and pain and distress that might affect someone's whole life and then locking them up. Why can't we use what we know works with people earlier on so they don't go to create that victim?
The impact of Merseycare's programme is difficult to quantify, but Lisa Jones of Liverpool John Moores University has figures for the costs of doing nothing.
We estimated that the cost of violence in Merseyside are around £200 million, so quite a substantial amount of money.
£200 million a year.
£200 million, yes, within 1 year.
Who's bearing the biggest burden? How do these costs break down?
For the police and criminal justice system, we saw £143 million. For the healthcare system, it was £33.5 million. And in terms of lost productivity, that affected people either missing work or having to take time off work, it was £32.9 million.
I just want to make sure you know how much you have helped me. You have had
The support has been good to bring on my confidence. It's helped me become a good dad and better partner. Absolutely amazing.
More thank yous. Card sent to Dr. Lisa Marsland of Liverpool's FABS therapy programme. She works with parents at risk of offending.
there's a mum with white hair and she's one of our volunteers now. And she had every risk, adversity under the sun that, probably could have ended up with Lisa's forensic service in essentially. She had a tag when she was pregnant for mental health, domestic violence, and with the right support at the right time, to help her have that bonding and attachment and separate out those issues from her son, who she loves and adores. She's testament really to how many of our vulnerable families can break through difficult times. and can break cycles. In Babs, our ethos is there's no such thing as hard to reach families. They're not just going to turn up at a clinic. They're not just going to respond to a text message when they've got no credit on the phone. If you invest more in prevention, early intervention, services like Babs, you won't need to build more prisons, you won't need to build another kind of Ashworth hospital, because you're supporting very vulnerable families at the earliest opportunity to break those cycles.
Dr. Lisa Wright and Dr. Mark Walton argue now is the time for government to grasp this nettle.
What the public want generally from sentencing is for people to be less likely to want to offend again. And I guess our ethos is very much in line with that.
What kind of results have you had with your service users?
They will constantly tell you that they've developed some element of personal growth.
People can change, but they can also change before they've actually committed an offence.
If we looked at how much it costs, if someone commits a crime, how much it costs to investigate them, to arrest them, to go through a trial, to get put in prison, how much it costs for the victim to get help for mental and physical problems, I think you might find that it's cheaper to invest in prevention.
Well, that was Dominic Casciani reporting, and thank you so much to our listeners, Dr. Lisa Wright and Dr. Mark Walton, for their contribution. One of the things we try and do on this programme is to bring our listeners together with people who are actual experts in the field as well. And Andy Cook is HM Chief Inspector of Constabulary and Fire.
Somebody served down here with a pretty small handle with Buckeye Girl. I don't think we weren't even able to find out who the actor was. We did like 2,000 followers, just screenshotted it, put a highlight over his name, and posted it on X and tagged another user on Twitter with a large following, and it took off from there. So it shows how fragmented the legal system is. It shows, the problems of not having a robust local resource in the towns. We all have people online and Facebook groups to get their news and information, and you never know what can go viral. You can post something in a private Facebook group and it can end up on Facebook.
And what impact do you think it has doing that on Springfield at home?
Oh, it's had a massive effect. Bomb threats, people who are sending on town report on it. There's been a lot of structures there. The town has been having to register this viral false that's part of why this is going on viral, because there's so much happening. This is not a distraction, right? There's no epidemic of immigrants in people's pets. There's been, in fact, no verified report about this happening, and yet it's dominating the market. Yeah, so one of the benefits of the incorporation of AI and other sorts of technologies is that nowadays it's everyone has the access to legal media, right? Before you used to have to be able to use Photoshop or something like that in order to put together images that didn't exist. Nowadays you can type it into ChatGPT or AI search queue on Twitter and get images from Twitter. And so I think that once
And for those who haven't seen it, like listening or watching, how do you describe the need for Trump himself?
Yeah, so Trump himself is ensuring images himself with AI-generated cats and ducks. Those are some of the things around these racist things around imitating animals, and particularly focuses on ducks and cats. And so using Trump with them, there's one image of a cat holding a sign that says "Save me from the law" or "I hate the law" or something along those lines. So there's been a whole lot of very popular and so kind of cartoonish
And are they being used, memes and videos on the other side, to debunk the claims that's
yeah, so I think that it's the way that it's being used represents the model of Trump in some ways. And I have a couple of incidents that we do misclaim that migrants would be eating pets. But I think there's a real problem with that as a response. Is that yes, it's making fun of Trump and fans, etc. But it's also amplifying And instead what they did is kind of made the issue about them.
Clearly, immigration is an issue that many people feel really strongly about. Thank you so much, AJ Bauer, and also Jeff Brewster for coming on the programme. Now, we could see the decline of one of the platforms providing some of these needs because TikTok's fate currently hangs in the balance in the United States. You might remember Joe Biden signed a law stating that unless its Chinese parent company sells it, TikTok will be banned. That concerns fears of foreign manipulation. Well, this week, the company has been fighting the ban in a Washington appeals court. And Lara O'Reilly from Business Insider is here. Lara, just explain, what are TikTok arguing in the appeal to try and battle this?
TikTok's lawyers are essentially trying to convince this panel of 3 judges that a ban would essentially violate users' First Amendment rights, free speech rights in other words, and that outweighs any national security concerns that people might have about the app. And the overriding concern is that TikTok's parent company is Chinese, and the worry is that the app can be used to spread misinformation or sow discord in the US as part of a government influence operation. And there's also a concern that TikTok will be used to hoover up lots of personal data about Americans, including high-profile ones. It's already banned from lots of government devices already. Probably not advised to if you're a spy either.
And a group of influencers have joined forces with TikTok, I think, to challenge the ban. Who are they? What's their argument?
So, yeah, this happened earlier this year, actually. A group of influencers took to Capitol Hill to protest the possible ban. And what they're saying is that any such ban would affect their businesses. They built huge followings on this platform. They make money through TikTok through doing brand deals or a share of ad revenue or selling things. And TikTok's arguing that it's got the 5 million businesses in the US on the app, and that would severely affect them if it go away tomorrow.
And does the Chinese parent company ByteDance, does it look like it will be willing to sell?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's why they're in the appeals court. It's a big money making for them, and it's an incredible Chinese influence in the US. Obviously, that's one of the arguments that it's having an outsized effect on culture. By some estimates, I think TikTok's on course to generate somewhere around 7 billion in ad revenue in the US next year. Lots of people get their news from TikTok. Increasingly, people are shopping on there. They want to hold on to this app.
And what's the deadline for the sale?
So when is that unrealistic enough? I've got a really annoying answer for you, which is the clock starts January the 19th should this ban go through, but TikTok has a right to appeal again and take this to the Supreme Court should it not go in its favour, so this can roll on for a number of months.
Okay, well David Rennie is with us too. We're going to talk about your time covering China for this in a moment, David, but you watch from Beijing, I imagine, as the US plans to ban TikTok and progress. What's your take on this?
Take a step back and to say that we're trying something we've never tried before, which is to have a country, China, which is clearly now seen as an adversary in some ways, certainly in America, and yet it's absolutely intimately in the lives of half the American population. TikTok counts, including lots of kids. You know, if you think back to the Cold War, the 60s and 70s, certainly you wasn't in your kid's bedroom kind of entertainment in the middle of America, and so then, that was an ideological threat on the other side of the world that had no role in your own life, in your own home. So I think one of the reasons this is so hard is that we're trying something we haven't tried before, which is to be economically completely instrumentally bound up with a country, China, that just has a completely different business system and is not afraid to admit it. And TikTok is particularly scary because the question on the exam paper is, could you construct a short video app that does Hoover's up data and hands it to the secret police and censors news about things like Xinjiang that the Chinese government doesn't want out there? Well, the answer on the exam paper is yes, there's a thing called Douyin in China which does all of that. It's one of the most popular social media apps in China, and it's owned by the same company that owns TikTok. It's the system. So whether TikTok is telling the truth or not about the fact that it says it doesn't do all those terrible nefarious things in America, the very same company does all those things as a condition of doing business in China, because that's the way the Chinese media business works.
And will people in China know about this fight in the US for TikTok, and how is it being perceived from a Chinese perspective?
So it's essentially a nationalist story in China. It's that, once again, the evil, prejudiced, racist Americans can't handle competition from China. So they're crushing a wonderful company. And Douyin is enormously popular in China. So it's kind of seen as a champion that has been bullied overseas by the selfish, jealous Americans.
And Lara, just to bring you back in, I mean, TikTok's not alone when it comes to concerns in different countries about foreign manipulation. Last week,
I've asked for permits, I've never been allowed to go to Tibet. So that's one pressure, is physically stopping me doing things. So,
你會唔會三喺埋後面？
and then you're followed by
如果你唔想咗後，
so
你都行咗白後咗
try and conduct, people are listening, people are filming it, people are photographing. So the effect of that is you go somewhere like Xinjiang, where we know that Uyghurs and other minorities will end up in real trouble, probably on the kind of re-education camp for being in the Western media. Essentially, I'm one of the journalists who would subscribe to you shouldn't seem to be any media in Xinjiang. It's just not responsible. I think that's one issue. The other big thing you have to worry about is the safety of the people you speak to, even in less sensitive villages, farms, businesses. You're doing a story about youth unemployment or pollution or drought, climate change, things that are the normal business of being a foreign correspondent. The pressure and the threats, the dangers to people in business and their sensitivity, that has gone up and up and up, and it's not an accident, deliberate policy. When I was in the village recently, within minutes, the local party secretary comes kind of panting up the hill, says that the villagers have all reported immediately they've seen a foreigner in the village. He's very proud of this. He said, we are trained to look for foreign spies, we're trained to think about national security, so as soon as they see a foreigner, then they'll report you to the authorities, and no one is going to speak to them. He's very proud of this. And that, in my kind of 10 years in total over the quarter century, that has got worse. That is
was it always kind of, was it like that everywhere, or were you sometimes freer to get back?
No, it's got a lot worse. And there was a time back in the 1990s where the best journalism was being done by really talented Chinese investigative reporters. Some of them worked with the state and party controlled newspapers, but they had more freedom to report. Not to say the Communist Party was a bad party, but to say there's a factory pumping pollution, giving people cancer. That was a really important public service journalism. It was possible in the 1990s in a way that was really almost completely impossible.
And presumably you were still asking questions, difficult questions of Chinese officials. How have you responded to them? Were they surprised that you were talking to them in a way that presumably people, journalists working in state owned media, need to know?
It's quite a because the Chinese media
哥哥，陣間我去 Musical Theatre 嗰時問下佢哋嗰個 Summer Production 幾時開始好，跟住睇下你個 camping 可唔可以同佢 Summer Production 一齊。嚇？得啊，因為我呢度佢塞車嗰啲好似要行第二啲路，同埋你睇咗好耐 screen 啊，哥哥。你頭先睇咗好耐 screen。No, what did you do then? Reading books in library? You were mad?
How you're seen as a West? I mean, does he?
Okay,
He
this is
wants China's story to get out.
Two things.
Does that mean that they are comforted with you when you speak to people because they're aggressively kind of pushing Chinese message?
Yeah, so the order has been given by the very top leaders, Supreme Leader Xi Jinping. He said, I want people to tell China's story well. So that translates in the real world to the kind of people who call you in for bollocking as a foreign correspondent are now forced to be stricter and more severe, and the bollocking is longer. There's also tremendous pressure to say, media like The Economist or BBC or the New York Times, who are they to decide what is right and wrong? We're actually going to democratize our coverage, and so they're very proud of having influencers from places like the UK or other Western countries coming on trips, sometimes paid by the Chinese, to go to places exactly like Xinjiang, to stand next to the one mosque that is open under intense surveillance and say, look, there's a mosque. The Western media is lying to say there's no freedom for Muslims in this place. There's a mosque. Now, if you know any detail at all, you know how strictly controlled, how minutely surveilled that mosque is. But this push to say, we're going to try and reach out to the sincere people who mean well, we're not trying to attack China or hold China back. So that's being used as a weapon against those Western media who are still in the country.
And you obviously living there through the pandemic, controversial zero COVID policy that saw millions of people in China quarantined. What impact did that have on your journal?
Well, it was used fairly cynically during the pandemic when people were still trying to go out and do reporting. I was sometimes going to villages early on during the pandemic, and as soon as the local police or the propaganda bureau turned up, their new weapon to use against you was to say, well, you can either leave immediately and go back to Beijing and stop reporting, or we might just have to quarantine you in this village for the next 2 weeks because potentially you're a danger and being infected. I remember one time they set up a bogus roadblock, police roadblock, just to stop a colleague and I going to the border with North Korea and said it was a COVID pandemic control measure, although traffic was pouring past us, no other cars could stop. So they were very cynically using that additional control mechanism to try and limit annoying foreign authorities.
And what, when you look back and think about your time,
得路都話哥哥，
you were able to do it, obviously very proud.
可以睇路啊，
How do you reflect on it? Do you feel
佢十幾分鐘。
as well as you could, but you would have wanted to do more? Or how do you think?
Of course, you want to do more. I mean, the task I tried to set myself, example, the tremendous privilege of being in China on the ground, was to try and explain how Chinese people see the world through their eyes, rather than just kind of looking from the outside. But China is not a completely closed country. It's not North Korea. It's actually, you can talk to Chinese people about pretty sensitive subjects. If you don't directly ask them what they think about the Communist Party or Xi Jinping, they're incredibly open in some ways to talking to foreigners like me, despite all of the torrent of propaganda, which, has been effective. People will say, oh, if you're from the BBC, you're going to say bad things about China. I'm glad you're not from the BBC. These people have never seen a single minute of BBC coverage, but state media has told them that the BBC is mean to China and wants to sort of damage China. But generally, you can ride a crowded sleeper train, talk to other passengers until late in the night. You can go to talk to parents about whether they feel their children are going to have a better life than them. As long as it's not explicitly political. One of the great joys, one of the things I miss most about China is that chance to get out and talk to real people. And it's an incredible credit to them that despite all of the propaganda and even the risk that they're sometimes running to talk to a foreign journalist, they're still willing to say what they feel.
While we have you though, you may have seen that Australia is planning to ban children from using social media, and yesterday EU rules are thought to prompt Meta, and Facebook and Instagram to introduce age restrictions as well. The app you were mentioning, the Chinese equivalent of TikTok, already does restrict use. Is China leading the way on this?
Yeah, China is very strict, and it's partly political, it's partly the Communist Party is also in some ways, with a small c, a very conservative party. It's very paternalist. The top leader, he worries about things like children being unfit or overweight or not, wanting to join the army or, not wanting to work hard, and so he worries that they're spending too much time on their screens, on their phones. He's kind of a grouchy old granddad in some ways, despite being Communist Party top leader.
And before you go, you've obviously left China now. You were talking earlier about the decrease in the number of journalists out there. Is The Economist, another Economist journalist, heading out there to replace you? How are you going to cover China from now on?
So we have excellent colleagues on the ground in China still, staff correspondents, fewer than we would like. And the one really sad thing at the moment is that I launched and wrote this column about China every week for the past 6 years with Taiwan. I wrote 220 of those. I just wrote the last, and we have got a note at the bottom saying that because the
account 而家係 20,000
until we get my replacement in
19,000
on the ground, we're suspending the column, and that breaks our hearts. It's been a big thing for us to have a weekly China column, and until we can get a columnist resident in China again.
And this is about a visa.
This is about a visa, so we hope very much that. And I'd argue for China's sake. Of course, I write things that annoy them, but I'm also, I hope, capturing how China sees the world and the voices of Chinese people, and not to write about things that are not political at all. Alzheimer's being a new issue, the way that China is trying to solve, poor eyesight among Chinese kids, divorce rates rising, and that's leading to remarriage for the first time. What does that mean in the way that Chinese families work? It's not about the Communist Party. I think if you don't have journalists in China, you're not going to bring China to life and make people understand that it's 1.4 billion human beings with human lives. So I think the Chinese are doing themselves a massive disservice to not allow more journalists in on the ground.
Do please get in touch with us and let us know if and as and when you succeed, The Economist succeeds on that front. Thank you so much, David Rennie. for all of that. Now, some other media news has been surfacing here in the UK about the proposed sale of one of the world's oldest Sunday papers, The Observer. And Lara O'Reilly from Business Insider is still here. Lara, this is the news we were talking about at the top. The Tortoise wants to buy The Observer, splitting it from its sister paper, The Guardian. What do we know about it? What are the plans?
So essentially, it's kind of no secret, sadly, that the news business is kind of jolly challenged right now, and The Guardian's no exception. And while it's managed to kind of grow the revenue that it derives kind of directly from readers, whether that's through memberships or donations, that's unfortunately been outpaced by the slowdown in ad revenue and print sales, and it reported a loss last year. So yeah, in comes Tortoise. So what do we know about Tortoise? I told you a little bit at the start of the show. It specialises in what it calls slow news, and it skews kind of fairly young, the female under 44. They're very specific, that's due to kind of advertising targeting segments. And what they've essentially said, the Guardian wasn't looking to sell The Observer.
你可唔可以收到 email？
approached the company,
就係
and they've said
嗱
that
呢頭係咪頭先
25 million pounds
想
in
入嗰個
The Observer over
Google
the next 5 years.
嗰個
Do we
account？
know where that money's coming from? Because it
你
sounds
頭
like
先係咪想入
a lot.
Google account？
It is.
係咪唔得？
There hasn't been much detail about that. I mean, we know that
我收到 email 話
that
想
Tortoise
想
itself
sign
has
in。
raised roughly about 16 million in its history.
So this is a lot more than that. This is 25 million more.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, split over the next 5 years, presumably they're going to have to find some more cash from somewhere because they are another loss-making media outlet.
Public computer
Their most
will sign
recently
in。
published accounts. It's going to be interesting. They say that they're going to continue to publish the Observer print product, and print for Tortoise, I guess, is very much a kind of branding exercise, and it's visibility on the newsstand, perhaps possibility of a new ad revenue stream for them. It'll be interesting to see how the brand kind of continues over the time, whether the Observer stays, maybe we'll see, the Sunday Tortoise, who knows.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I believe there's some disquiet amongst Guardian journalists because clearly the Guardian and the Observer have been so linked and are so important to each other over the years. But you can see from an outside perspective that the Observer name is such an important brand in
media.
And yet with falling sales and all of that, throw in the fact that Tortoise is trying to do something different and does a lot of stuff digitally but doesn't have the same name recognition, that it could actually be a great pairing.
Sure, and also for the Guardian, it means a more refined focus on the Guardian product and particularly the digital products that it's looking to build. Yes, with Tortoise, they say that they're going to move some of the, try to continue the kind of internationally renowned journalism that the Observer's kind of famed for, and move that into its audio products where it's really kind of shown prowess, so that's its podcasts and things. One thing we don't really know about yet is the price. You were asking me about where's the money coming from. Well, we're not sure how much they'll need. And I'm kind of unclear whether it's going to be a fire sale for the Guardian to shed more costs. And then also, I kind of wonder what it means for the Guardian as a print product going forward. Again, we don't know a lot about the Guardian circulation anymore because they decided to keep that privately to report it. But the last time they did was about 3 years ago. And, it falls to something like 136,000, probably dropped up a lot more since then. The Guardian's even lower, it's about 60,000 versus their estimates. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what changes this means for the Guardian itself too.
Okay, well, Lara O'Reilly from Business Insider, thank you so much. And one of the problems for papers like the Guardian and the Observer is the decline in traffic and advertising revenue because of decisions made by search engines and social media to deprioritise news content. Well, those headwinds got potentially a lot stronger in the UK in the last few weeks. Some of you might have noticed a change in Google's search engine. Instead of bringing up a list of links to sites to visit to get the information you want, you may be now seeing an AI-generated answer to your query first. This is just one example of the way AI is changing the way we live and work. To discuss the latest in AI developments and how they're the product of a fierce race in Silicon Valley, I'm joined by Parmi Olsen. Hello, Parmi. Parmi's a Bloomberg opinion columnist covering technology and also author of a new book called Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race
that will change the world. So big titles there for me. Let's just start with Google's AI summaries, as I mentioned there. What impact could this have on papers like The Guardian?
Oh, I think it's already having an impact. I was just looking at a report on the Press Gazette recently, which I think showed that some content creators have noticed a decline in traffic already. Even though it's only been a short while that these AI overviews have been out, I think they're taking up something like 16% of searches in the UK are now being given AI overviews. And
so you're not back to the Guardian website or the Times website or whatever.
No, I mean, it's interesting. When you look at the overviews, they do have links in them. And I was actually talking to people at Google a couple of weeks ago, people who work on the search team, and they were saying, actually the quality of clicks of people who are coming to these links is higher than previous searches from Google. Now, I think that's maybe a clever way of them just trying to justify what's going on here.
And just explain to people how it does that, just so that you don't quite know. Is this the end of the internet as we know it?
I wouldn't put it quite like that, though some people have. It can certainly feel that way, because why would you explore all the other links on page 1 if the answer is right there, synthesized at the very top in this lovely summarized answer by AI?
As long as you trust it.
And maybe you shouldn't. But one of the ways that this works essentially is a large language model. It's a new type of AI model that's really taken hold in the last 2 years, sparked by ChatGPT. Google's now got its own version, and that same underlying technology is what synthesizes all the data that it's scraped across the web into this answer that it gives for your searches. Now, I think the thing that's kind of interesting is that for Google, it makes a lot of money from different types of searches, transactional searches and informational searches. So if I search for Nike shoes or headphones, Google is going to make more money when I click on those resulting links. If I put in a question about, cooking or something about what's going on in the war in Ukraine, I'm going to get an informational response. Google doesn't make as much money from that content that's generated from those sites. So in a way, what's actually happening here is I think Google's not losing out quite as much as publishers are losing out.
Okay, well, I mean, that's one side of this rollout of potential, AI into consumer products. Much recent progress in this technology is driven by this intense battle between tech titans even, to dominate the race. And in your new book, you detail some of that right. Google behind AI.
Well, I think there are so many different players in AI, but I really wanted to focus on these two men. And when ChatGPT came out almost 2 years ago now, I remember thinking at the time, like, wow, I don't think people really understand the story or know about the story behind all this.
And when you say two men,
in an organized drone attack, the explosions near the town of Terafats caused a huge fire and were so powerful that they were picked up by earthquake sensors. The Russian Ministry of Defense hasn't commented, but the authorities in the nearby town of Terafats have ordered a partial evacuation. The post office has confirmed its chief executive, Nick Reed, will step down in March next year. Mr. Reed temporarily stood back from the role in July, saying he wanted to give his full attention to the next stage of the Horizon inquiry. In a statement, he described his tenure as an extraordinarily challenging time. Our business correspondent, Ben King, agrees.
He took over in 2019, just as the post office was in the process of losing the Bates versus the post office litigation. And not only did he have that to deal with in the subsequent inquiry, which has dominated headlines for much of this year, but it's in fact been going on for years previously, he also had to deal with the business situation of the post office, which was also extremely challenging. Here was a business that was losing money and seeing many of its revenue streams sort of disappearing as services shift to online.
Monthly figures from the Office for National Statistics show that inflation remained at 2.2% in August. Analysts believe it makes a further cut to interest rates unlikely when the bank's Monetary Policy Committee meets tomorrow.
Minji, thank you very much for talking about the decision going on in the US on interest rates later in the programme. But after the extraordinary events in Lebanon yesterday, a second day of electronic device warfare is being waged against Hezbollah. Reports of injuries and deaths have been coming in through the afternoon as walkie-talkies exploded. Now, the latest figures we have from the Lebanese Health Ministry they've been saying that 9 have been killed today and 300 injured. Before we get the latest on that, a reminder of yesterday's events, because this time yesterday we were bringing you news that hundreds of cages being used by members of Hezbollah had exploded. There were many injured and reports of deaths, and we know that 12 people, including 2 children, were killed, and something like 3,000 are still in hospital. Noor Oster is an emergency doctor at a hospital in Beirut. She was on duty when the explosion started occurring, and she spoke to the world at once.
They all had fingers amputations. They had injuries to both of their hands as well as injuries to their eyes. So all of them, we saw the same injuries, same pattern of injuries in all of the patients. Also, we saw some patients with injuries to the thighs and the abdomen. So we thought also that these are the ones that did not pick up their pagers, and unfortunately it exploded there.
Well, this afternoon, sirens and explosions sounded again in different parts of Lebanon as the first of the funerals for those killed yesterday were underway. The Lebanese Red Crescent says there is
Now, for a number of months, the Fed has been very slow to basically declare victory. But presuming that they do go ahead and start cutting, that will really be the moment when the Federal Reserve says, actually, we do think we've managed to land the aeroplane, if you like, i.e. make the economy reach a point where it looks like a soft landing. And we do think that there's a need to both support the economy more and to recognise that inflation has come back under control.
Obviously, everybody at the moment is thinking about politics when it comes to the United States. They will always say there's no politics in any of our decisions. What is the feeling about how the election, if at all, is impacting the thinking of the Fed?
Well, it puts the Fed in a bit of a nightmare position because Donald Trump has signaled very clearly that if the Fed does go ahead and cut, particularly if it cuts by 50 basis points, not 25 basis points, he will regard it as a sign that the Federal Reserve is being supported for the White House and essentially enabling them to declare, not only that the economy's got better, but it's going to get better going forward. So any cut from the Fed will almost certainly be criticised by the Republicans.
Let's talk through the effects of an interest rate cut. If they go the full whack, half point today, what effect does that have? Or is it now all baked in?
Well, the immediate effect that everyone who's involved in politics will be looking for is what that does to the housing market and mortgage costs in particular. And one of the great surprises has been actually that the housing market has held up pretty well to date. But certainly for homeowners and voters, any kind of reduction in mortgage interest payments is going to be welcomed significantly. As far as companies concerned, then obviously a reduction in the borrowing rate will be helpful potentially. There's actually been a lot of investment in the economy in the last couple of years, so it's unlikely to turbocharge business plans that much, but it's going to be certainly welcomed. Perhaps one of the biggest areas where we're going to see a reaction will be the stock market, which has frankly been on quite a tear already.
It is interesting, isn't it? They have turned the corner, assuming rates come down today. The American Federal Reserve has been later than the Europeans and the ECB and the British in doing that. I wonder what's going on there, why they have been.
Well, one of the reasons why they have been later is that the data has not necessarily been that obviously in support of lots of rate cuts until now. I mean, the reality is the US economy has performed very well, and inflation has been slow to come down. It's now basically touching the Fed's target. But the Fed's also grappling with another problem, which is that it has this what's called a dual mandate. It's supposed to keep employment.
Make Mr. Hochstein's job even harder. Israel justifies its actions as self-defense against the group the US, the UK and other Western countries classify as a terrorist organization. But there is fury and alarm in Lebanon and the wider region that Israel's attacks appear to have been launched with little concern for bystanders and family members who have been wounded and killed alongside Hezbollah fighters. The region is back on the edge of an all-out war, which both Hezbollah and Israel say they do not want. Sooner or later, though, they will slide into one if this continues.
The BBC has learnt that Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, is being paid over £3,000 more than him. Ms Gray has secured an annual salary of £170,000 a year, more than any cabinet minister or any special advisor in government history. The salary has provoked a row within government, and a number of Whitehall sources briefed the BBC on Ms Gray's pay. Our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, has more.
Most government advisors spend their careers in obscurity.
應該就轉右跟住
She investigated lockdown rule breaking in Boris Johnson's Downing Street. She later left officialdom to join Sir Keir Starmer's team and is now his chief of staff. Her 2 months in Downing Street have been punctuated by leaks portraying fractious relationships at the top of this fledgling government. One theme has been more junior advisors complaining that they aren't being paid enough.
quite good.
The BBC's disclosure that Ms Gray is being paid much more
everything
has
was good
aggravated many
because
of them.
the role was
Analysts
good.
say that pay is set by independent civil servants. and that she is
Financial
subject
finance
to
stuff was good.
a
Everything.
personal campaign against her, which is grossly
Maybe not.
unfair. And
You
they
you won't
deny
have
claims
internet.
that she declined suggestions she take a salary slightly below the Prime Minister's.
Sorry?
Either way,
That
this
means I'll be
bitter
able to sign
public
into this
eruption of
one and
briefing so
I'll
early in the
live on
government's
my
term
gauge today,
may not be
you know?
sustainable for the Prime Minister much longer.
The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has told reporters that the Labour government was lucky to have Sue Gray, and it wasn't up to him how much advisers were paid.
Is Sue Gray worth more than the Prime Minister? We are very lucky to have Sue. And the Prime Minister? We're very lucky to have him too. And should he be paid more than his top aide? My decision.
Train drivers who are members of the ASLEF union have accepted a pay offer from the government that brings to an end long-running strikes in England, Scotland and Wales. Staff went on strike 18 times and stopped working non-contracted overtime, and the previous Conservative government linked changes in working conditions to a pay increase. Our Transport correspondent Sean Dilley reports.
This result ends more than 2 years of pain for train users. 16 train companies have seen 18 days of strike action, severe disruption since 2022. Negotiations with the previous Conservative government had failed. The General Secretary of ASLEF, Nick Whelan, says that the deal is fair.
For the 2 years of COVID, we could seek a pay rise, but effectively with many members that had had a pay rise for 5 years. And we want something that put a dent in the cost of living. That's what we asked for. And then you negotiate and you
How was
make
the dance,
an offer. And then if you believe the offer's valuable enough,
係咪同一樣嗰啲同學
and then they decide. And
就
they
真
decided
嚇
that this is a good offer.
The deal is not dissimilar in cash terms
Okay.
to one rejected by
有冇人走啊
the
咁
union in April last year.
Okay.
That had offered 12% over 3 years, but the union
Okay.
said it wasn't prepared to accept 55 changes to drivers' working terms and conditions tied to the pay rise. The new deal is worth 15%.
So new kids are the year 5
no strings attached.
The new kids are the
union
year 5
says
people.
It too has been offered similar terms that it will recommend to its members. The Conservative Party has criticised the deal, saying it will do nothing to prevent future strikes. But the government says the deal will clear the way to vital reforms.
The Post Office has announced that its Chief Executive, Nick Reed, will leave the company in March after more than 5 years in the role. He took over in 2019 from Paula Reynolds, who left the firm ahead of a damning High Court ruling about Horizon IT software. Mr. Reed temporarily stood back from his work in July, saying he wanted to focus on the Horizon inquiry. Our business reporter, Ben King, reports.
Nick Reed's tenure was defined by the campaign led by Sir Alan Bates for justice for wrongly convicted sub-postmasters and the public inquiry which followed. During the same period, the Post Office has been losing money and struggling to replace the flawed Horizon IT system. This year also saw 2 messy public rows, one over a bonus paid to senior executives in error, and another which saw a former Post Office chairman claim Mr. Reed had threatened to resign unless he got a pay rise, something Mr. Reed denied. The Post Office has been criticised for the slow pace of paying compensation to the sub-postmasters, with Sir Alan Bates saying Mr. Reed hadn't done anything for the victims. Liam Byrne, the Labour MP who chairs the Commons Business Committee, said it was right for him to go.
He's been dealing with a lot of legacies from the past, but frankly, at times there have been questions about how tightly things have been gripped, how tightly things have been driven through, and let's not forget, there have been innocent victims that have paid the price for that.
Mr. Reed is due to give 3 days of evidence at the next phase of the inquiry, which will look at current practice and recommendations for the future.
You're listening to the 6 o'clock news on BBC Radio 4. The main news so far: exploding walkie-talkies have killed 9 people and wounded at least 300 others in a second wave of attacks across Lebanon. Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, is being paid over £3,000 more than him. Still to come.
Imagine standing in a dark night and trying to see one of the faintest stars in the sky, and then the moonlight. That's about the difference in brightness, and that's the problem.
Scientists complain that Elon Musk's new satellites are blocking their view of the universe. Sources at Ukraine's security service have told the BBC they were behind an overnight drone attack on a major Russian ammunition depot about 300 miles north of the Ukrainian border. The nearby town of Turopets has been subject to an evacuation order after fire and large explosions in the area. Nearby seismic sensors even reported a minor earthquake. From Kyiv, our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse reports.
The motives for Ukraine targeting this military complex are obvious. It housed an arsenal worth more than £30 million, which included artillery shells, ballistic missiles, and various explosives. Fuel tanks were stationed there too. Now, its warehouses have seemingly been destroyed in a series of explosions so powerful, even NASA reported seeing heat sources from satellite images. Despite the devastation and booms in the background, the governor of the surrounding Tver region, Igor Rudenia, urged people to stay calm.
Today, the result of the arrival of the unmanned aerial vehicles on the territory of the Russian Federation, the air defense system of the Ministry of Defense did its job. The unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down, and falling debris caused the fire to start. We are now evacuating our population, residents who are in the danger zone, and maintaining public order.
With the West yet to grant Ukraine permission to launch similar strikes with missiles they provide, Kyiv will hope this attack proves strikes deep into Russia allow Ukraine to defend itself without provoking an escalation.
A 55-year-old businesswoman who was arrested after she posted a false name for the Southport attacker online will face no further police action. Bernadette Spofford from Chester later deleted the post, which claims the attacks were carried out by migrants who arrived on a small boat, and apologised after realising the information was wrong. She's now posted a video complaining about her treatment by police. Our North of England reporter Nick Garnett has the story.
Ms. Spofford published a social media post in the hours after the stabbing in July, sharing a name and saying he was an asylum seeker who was on a watch list. She added that if it were true, there'd be hell to pay. It wasn't. When she realised her mistake, she deleted the post, but was arrested on suspicion of publishing written material to stir up racial hatred and false communication. Cheshire Police has now confirmed it's dropping the case because of insufficient evidence. Now back on social media, Ms. Spofford says she was detained a few days after the police turned up mob-handed at her house. She admitted she hadn't checked the source before copying and pasting what she says was someone else's original post. The search for who made that original mistake went international after the riots, with authorities in Pakistan arresting and then releasing a man linked to a little-known website called Channel 3 Now. But there have been some convictions for social media usage, including 2 men, one from Leeds who admitted publishing material intended to stir up racial hatred through Facebook posts, and one in Northampton who was jailed for more than 3 years for similar offences. The inquiry into the convicted child killer Lucy Leckie was heard from the mother of twins attacked by police. The woman said she had only recently been given an uncensored version of the report on the neonatal unit where her babies were treated. The document was written by the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health 8 years ago. Lucy Leckie killed 7 children and attempted to murder 7 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2015 and 2016. Our North of England correspondent Judith Marcus reports.
In 2016, senior hospital managers commissioned an external review of the neonatal unit. A public version of the report was put on the hospital's website, while a confidential version was kept by senior managers. Only the private copy contained references to the nurse Lucy Leckie. Giving evidence, the mother of the twin boys known as babies E and F, who were attacked by Leckie, said she'd only seen the unredacted report this week. Baby E was murdered by Lucy Letby in the early hours of August 4, 2015. Letby attempted to murder baby F the next day. The mother, who can't be identified for legal reasons, revealed a consultant from the unit, whose name is also protected by court order, had written to the family more recently to apologise for not being open with them about what was happening on the unit at the time of their son's death. Baby E's mother described receiving the letter as really emotional and noted it was the first time anyone from the Countess of Chester Hospital had apologised. It was brave of the consultant and a really kind gesture.
The Church of England's leadership is holding an urgent meeting this evening after the panel that appoints new bishops was unable to agree. There are concerns that divisions over issues such as same-sex marriage are preventing the panel from deciding, leaving some dioceses without a leader. Our religion editor, Ali Makbul, reports.
This urgent meeting was called by a group of bishops concerned about dysfunction in the way appointments are made to the very top of the Church of England. The Crown Nominations Commission, made up of 15 people, recommends new bishops and archbishops. They'll have a hand in selecting the new Archbishop of Canterbury in the coming year or so. But on two recent occasions, in Carlisle and Ely, that panel failed to appoint anyone, leaving the posts vacant. Insiders have talked of the impact of bitter ideological splits, particularly in same-sex relationships, with some panel members being unable to set aside their own views to agree on a new appointee. Measures to be considered this evening include the removal of the secret ballot, but this is just one indication of the way church divisions appear to be getting in the way of the workings of the institution.
Australian police have infiltrated an encrypted messaging system allegedly used by criminals to facilitate drug trafficking and money laundering. The 32-year-old man accused of being the administrator of the camp known as Ghost was arrested in Sydney. The suspect has also been arrested in Italy, Ireland, Sweden and Canada. Almost £13 million worth of cocaine, cannabis and heroin has been seized. Our correspondent Tom Simons reports.
The website of Ghost is still online, offering secure messages, calls and videos. This morning, the Australian Federal Police raided the home of the alleged administrator of the service, JJ John. He had been in court charged with offences including supporting a criminal organisation. The AFP's Deputy Commissioner Ian
喂，哥哥，我買咗呢頂帽俾你，你睇下啱唔啱？買咗呢頂帽俾你，啱唔啱啊？係咪太細啊？喂，太大啊！俾你去嗰個 camping 嗰時用。
Police forces have known about Ghost before the earthquake, but 6 months ago, Australian police managed to use a virus to gain access to the service. Detectives could then read messages and see photos, including one of the man who Ghost was. He was sitting in the back pocket of the house crime, police said. There have been 46 arrests in Australia so far. In 2020, the UK received a massive amount of evidence from the penetration of another service, Cambridge, by French police, resulting in prosecutions still going through the courts. Monthly figures from the Office of National Statistics show that inflation remained at 2.2% in August, slightly above the Bank of England's target. Analysts believe makes further cuts to interest rates unlikely, with the bank's monetary policy committee meets tomorrow. Here's our economics editor, President. Rising airfares have kept the headline rate of inflation high, which is well down on twice as high as close to normal levels of the Bank of England target of 2%. An hour Mr. Treasury said there was some hope now that normal prices will return.
Negotiating bring better prices on the electric. It's nice to see fuel come down. That all helps because the only money we make is what we put on the product. We don't charge for a service. So, we can only stick those costs on the product. So hopefully over a period of time as the prices fall, our bills come down and we'll be able to pass them on to the customer.
The economist said that interest rates cut tomorrow for Bank of England are unlikely to be cut again from 5%. November was looking more likely. Already, mortgage rates have been dropping. After a 3-year inflation shock, interest rates now falling for other people on the verge of pushing the European Central Bank, US Federal Reserve, set to follow 60 basis points. During the market, more than 7 points in the battle against inflation will have to be watched by global markets.
In the city, 100 share index ended the day down 56 points, 8,254. On Wall Street, a short time ago, Dow Jones was up 5 points, 41,612. On the currency markets, the pound was trading at $1.32.1 against the euro. Sterling was at €1.18.7. Scientists in the Netherlands say latest satellites made by Elon Musk's Starlink company are emitting powerful radiation that prevents astronomers from peering deep into the universe. They say interference is blinding telescopes as it's 10 million times stronger than the object researchers want to study. So Musk's parent company, SpaceX, has been asked for comment. Here's our science reporter, Georgina Rand.
Look up on a clear night, and there's a good chance one of these satellites will streak across the sky. SpaceX's Starlink isn't the only company launching internet satellites, but they are the largest, with more than 6,000 currently in orbit. The satellites get remote communities online faster than ever before, including in places like Ukraine or Yemen. But astronomers say that comes with a cost. A study by the Netherlands Institute for Radio Astronomy found unintended electromagnetic radiation from almost all of Starlink's second-generation satellites that they observed. They say the interference is 32 times stronger than previous versions of the satellite. And the Institute's director, Professor Jessica Dempsey, says the problem is getting worse.
Imagine standing on a dark night and trying to see one of the faintest stars in the sky, and then the moonlight. That's about the difference in
哦，嗰個好勁呢個車，你睇依家，你睇下隔離依家，哥哥，你睇依家，知唔知啊？都逼喎。
Astronomers say they've successfully worked with satellite companies in the past to find a solution. They are hopeful that this will happen again. But they are also calling for stricter regulation, warning that without action, soon the only constellations in the sky visible from Earth will be human-made.
A capybara called Cinnamon that escaped from a Shropshire zoo on Friday has been found, but not yet recaptured. She disappeared from Pooh Zoo outside Telford. With the help of a thermal drone, has been spotted in some nearby woodland. Live traps have since been put down to catch Cinnamon so she can be taken back home. A runner who was serenaded by Ed Sheeran has spoken about what she says was a random and surreal moment that's since gone viral. Nikki Atkins told BBC Breakfast that she went past the singer while he was filming a music video on a canal in central London yesterday. At first, she heard someone call to her.
Any requests?
Yeah.
Just running down to the canal and I sort of heard some music and saw someone sat in the front of a boat and like, you know, a ginger man, and in my head I thought, oh, that looks a bit like Ed Sheeran. And then I ran down and kind of ran onto the canal path just as he was passing, and I was like, oh, that is Ed Sheeran. And he asked me for a song request, so I sort of blacked out a little bit, but it was surreal.
Funerals with full military honours have taken place for two British soldiers who were killed 80 years ago during attempts to liberate the Netherlands during the Second World War. The remains of Private Henry Moon and Lieutenant Dermot Green Anderson were recovered from a battlefield and identified using advances in DNA testing. Our correspondent Anna Holligan reports from the Oosterbeek War Cemetery in Arnhem.
Hundreds of people came to show their gratitude to two men who gave their lives for our freedom. Private Henry Moon of the 7th Battalion, the Green Howards, was part of the ground offensive sent to relieve the surrounded airborne troops in Arnhem. They've been dropped behind